to wrap our minds around everything that the Mahindra Group does. You can go into the sector, that industry, but then come on, that's a very business as usual definition. It's very strategy. Where's the creativity there? And more importantly, it doesn't really add up to tell you what the whole story is.
From a museum perspective, we wanted to tell the story of how Mahindra has helped shape entire sectors of the Indian economy. It's larger than just the tractors, the cars, the defense equipment, the real estate and everything else. It's larger than just those companies. It's about the impact the group has had on how these industries are run today.
What made sense to us then was to talk about our ambitions as a group, to think of problems we've solved, problems we're solving, and problems we hope to solve through the businesses we do. And then we looked at the various businesses within our group, the stars in our sky, and clustered them under each ambition that they are actually helping us realize. And ta-da! You see, 1 + 1 sometimes does give you 3. We want to find solutions, sustainable solutions, solutions that are good for the planet, good for people, and obviously good for business. I mean, Anand always says, people plus planets equal to profit. And you know what? It's true. We want to make the world a better place. And if you look at it, all of our businesses are designed around this.
We are one of those companies that has an immense but sadly undocumented history. We were founded just before independence, and at every stage in the nation's growth, we have done our bit to build India. In fact, we like to say that India's horoscope and the Mahindra Group's horoscope run in parallel. My first project threw me headfirst into Mahindra's history. And this was really very interesting for me because I've always loved delving into the history of anything that I undertake. So even after the project was over, I continued to talk to people across the organization out of sheer interest and collect stories of their memories, their heroes, their inspirations, their inflection points, their successes, their failures, long after the Core Values project was over. I found myself sitting on this entire treasure trove of stories with no audience except myself. And for a long time, I was wondering what to do with them. Now fast forward to 2013. One day I read a blog in the DNA newspaper written by a foreign tourist who was rather sniffy about the Gandhi Museum on Laburnum Road. They said it was such a disappointment because it was only, and I quote, a collection of dolls in glass cases. And quite honestly, I was really affronted. I mean, who was this person coming from a different culture who dismissed a museum dedicated to possibly the greatest human being of the 20th century as a collection of dolls in glass cases? But then when I thought more about it, I realized it was not the fault of the tourist. It was the fault of the museum. It was the fault of the way the narrative was organized and presented. They could not bring this great human being alive through this museum. Apart from facts and dates and dolls, it didn't tell people who Mahatma Gandhi really was. So that's when I realized what we could really do with the stories. We had to have a Mahindra museum, which would bring the Mahindra Group alive. I had all this stuff, and I was really worried that when I'm dead and gone, nobody will look at it. So the museum was the obvious answer. I did a lot of research, and then I sat down and wrote a note to Anand, where I described how I thought we could use all this material to produce a very different kind of museum.
I read Prochi's note. It was about so many stories. And the museum must be about stories. And the people who visit the museum, they should listen to these stories as if they're coming from people. I think that it kind of became an amazing brief. For me, that was my kickoff point into design of this museum.
Harsh and Elsie are very, very creative people. They looked at the whole thing very differently and actually took it to a completely new level. I was thinking only of stories, but they brought in art and artists and symbols, and immediately my own paradigm of what this museum could be shifted dramatically.
We didn't want this to be a museum of things past. Instead, we dreamed of a place where Mahindra lives today and dreams of tomorrow. This, in fact, is how the name the Museum of Living History came to life.
The museum is many things. It's a way of capturing the brand. It's a way of capturing corporate memory and mythology. It's a way of creating employee engagement and pride. It's a way of telling the world who we are.
Elsie and I, we always joke, we tell each other, our mission in life is to eradicate aesthetic poverty. And while working on the museum, many a times when we stuck a wall, we said, hey, this is a great place because this is a place where all these stories could come to life in a very beautiful way. Can this museum borrow from art? Can this heighten the emotions? Can it relay stories in an abstract yet meaningful way?
We didn't want this to be a repository for past glories, This is not a company, this is not an office. This is a place where people are important. It's where they spend their lives, they build their lives. It made sense to be the Mahindra Museum of Living History.
It was always going to be a place for emotional connection rather than an informational museum where you come to learn about something or someone. We never saw this as a space for display. It was always going to be a meandering walk, a chance to give the visitor a sense of how it all unfolded.
A pluralistic narrative, as Harsh would say.
And that's when a lot of us were looking at one another and saying, hey, what does that mean?
It means simply that no two people will experience the museum in the same way.
The visitor is the narrator.
Each person that enters will strike a chord with something or the other. They'll chart their own path through the museum.
It's such a small space, I really couldn't imagine how everything we wanted would actually fit in there. In my mind, I was expecting it to feel small, kind of cluttered and congested. I was blown away. It all fits. The space has flow. I'll be honest, I actually wouldn't even want it any bigger.
I love the analogy of the banyan tree to the Mahindra group. Sometimes when you look at a large banyan, you see a forest. But when you look closely, it's just one tree. It's one entity. It all comes from one seed.
We love the banyans in this space and we've created echoes of these trees wherever possible. There are 3 trees in the space and the 4th is the projection. When you first walk into the museum, you see the first banyan at the entrance. The second is when you walk into the rise section. The carpet mimics the tree rings that you see on really old trees. Then the mutoscope lets you grow your own banyan. And then when you walk into the amphitheater and look up, there's another beautiful tree looking back at you.
I know it doesn't look like it now, but this space, it used to hold a municipal water tank.
When we first came to this place, it was completely deserted. Nobody used to sit here and it was very dingy. And there was this hole in the center and we couldn't touch it because there's a tank there.
And there was this man whose job it was to come and push a button. I kid you not. He would come in, push the button, and the tank would start filling up and the building would have water. And then he would just sit on his chair, read the newspaper.
I've seen that guy who pushes the buttons. I started my career from this place too.
So did I. I just didn't have time to read the newspapers as much.
Elsie and I were sitting here and we were thinking, this is just not making sense. Let's go out. So we went out and we stood on the roof of the museum and we looked up. And there was this peepal tree actually looking into the museum. And we thought, what if we punch a hole here, make a skylight that looks into the museum? I think that's where the whole idea of the space and the layout of the museum began to take shape in our heads.
Poor Sandesh. He went through so much with this Nautilus spiral.
But look at it now. You have this beautiful skylight and that too with an eclipse. And the Nautilus spiral actually extends outward into the design of the museum. And here, where we are standing, instead of that strange tank, you have this beautiful amphitheater.
Who would have thought? How do you go from a municipal tanki to this?
I think the experience that we're all having right now is that we walk through this space and at every turn it's just exceeding our expectations.
We all shared the same dream, the same passion when it comes to this project.
I'm the last person who joined the museum team, and I know how seeing it all take shape makes me feel. So I can only imagine what the others are feeling right now. In my role, I've been interacting with everyone from the artists to contractors, and I see the way they are all reacting to the space. It's beautiful.
I've been a part of this team from the start, and I can't tell you how I feel looking around this museum now. This is my legacy too, you know.
Mine too. I have been here for such a long time, but this is the project I hope I'll be remembered for.
I am so proud of this team, so very proud. And we were so lucky that the minute we pitched the project to Anand, he immediately got it, and he backed it 100%. In many ways, he has become the creative impetus for the project, steering us through every obstacle. And there were many. And today, that dream has come true.
This was always going to be a special project. But I think having Anand back it the way that he did just made it more so.
You don't realize how big Mahindra is, how much it does, what all it is into, till you come to a place like this.
What you see here is our ambition as a group. We want to be nation builders, problem solvers, pavers of the way of the future, and you get a real sense of that here.
The museum has helped me understand what Mahindra Rise stands for overall. But you know, being part of this team, that's helped me understand what Mahindra stands for. And that is exactly what one visit is supposed to do for any person visiting the museum.
Now, I want to be an ambassador of the museum. I want to invite employees and their families to come in and experience it.
I've been part of this company for so long, and I just didn't know enough. Now, when someone joins a company, they can come here and find their bearings. They can see what they are a part of and what they are building.
Every person in the Mahindra group is a part of the big banyan.
And the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.